without the consultant, I probably would have been hyper focused on just my career experience, especially as I had gotten to the more senior levels within consulting, because to me, that was the most impressive, obviously the most top of mind, and, just demonstrated my, kind of my ability to interact with C-suite executives and manage multiple projects at once, lead a team. So to me, those are all MBA-like qualities. I think the reframing that the consultant was super helpful in just bringing to light is the fact that admissions officers are not only interested in, your exact capabilities in your most recent job. What they want to hear is a holistic person.
Hello, everyone. Today we get to hear from Jungduk, who's a 2021 Kellogg grad. She shares thoughts on why her business school consultant was very helpful and how she used school year internships to land a job in product management from consulting. If you like what we're doing, please leave us a rating or review. It really provides us with motivation and helps us continue to grow this podcast. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to How Did You Get In? I am so excited about our guest today, Jungduk Seo. Jungduk and I met our freshman year of college in the low-rise 7 dorms at Cornell. If any of you listeners are familiar with Cornell and its campus, we were in the ugliest dorms that existed. Luckily, the dorm interior didn't detract from us becoming fast friends, or at least on my end. After undergrad, Jungduk and I both moved to Boston and lived together for 4 years. During that time, she was crushing it in healthcare consulting. After a couple years, she decided to apply to business school. And I was very fortunate because I saw her getting organized and studying for the GMAT, which really lit the fire under my ass to start working on the business school application process too. I actually even vividly remember the day she got her 720 on the GMAT because she came back to the apartment all excited. And then we went out to celebrate with green beers because it was St. Patrick's Day weekend in Boston.
Lucky day.
Yes. Jungduk ultimately ended up at Kellogg, and from what I've gathered, absolutely loved her time there. We're so excited to dig into her process of applying and her time at Kellogg. And so welcome, Jungduk. We're so excited to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I figured to kick it off, would love to hear a little bit more about your background, where you grew up, what led you to Cornell, and kind of why you went into, what you were doing after undergrad, and kind of that whole process.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in the DC area in Maryland, and all throughout middle school and high school, I had always leaned more towards the math and the sciences, classic Asian family story, love to hear it. So when I was looking at colleges to apply to, I was really focused on engineering schools. And so as a result of that search, Cornell pretty quickly popped to the top of that list. And so I applied to Cornell specifically to engineering. And during my time there, pretty quickly figured out it actually wasn't the right fit for me. It was overall a super humbling experience. Like, I've never been so surrounded by people who are just so much smarter than me in every single capacity. But I pretty quickly realized that engineering was probably not the right fit for me, but I was already in the school, kind of already going down that track. So I ended up switching majors quite a few times, landed on operations research engineering, for which ultimately super grateful I stuck with it, because I think it just equips you with a set of critical thinking and problem solving skills that I otherwise wouldn't have gotten exposure to. But coming out of undergrad, it's kind of funny looking back, because, my parents had set up this fund for me to, help finance undergrad, and you're allowed to use that same fund for future school, graduate school as well. I was so confident coming out of Cornell that I would never go back to school that we liquidated it. I told my parents, forget it. I will never go back to grad school. It's a done deal. I'm 1000% confident. Don't need it. And sure enough, 5 years later, I was like, God damn it. But anyway, so after undergrad, I was kind of debating, what I wanted to do from there. Had always had kind of a natural interest in the healthcare space. So I ended up applying to a few healthcare consulting firms, one of which fortuitously was in Boston, where a few of my very best friends from college also happened to be, not a coincidence at all. And so I ended up going to a company called Health Advances. So they focus on healthcare strategy consulting. I worked there for about 5 years, helping a lot of, especially medical device and biotech companies with commercialization strategy. So yeah, that's just kind of the, I guess, the pre-MBA story. So I started there as an analyst and then worked my way up to being an engagement manager before leaving for Kellogg.
And you, I feel like actually, from what I gathered, really enjoyed Health Advances, really enjoyed the work that you were doing and the people that you were with, which, consulting is not always a perfect fit for everyone. So what kind of triggered the thought of, you know what, actually, I should go back to business school?
Yeah, it's so interesting because just hearing you talk about your own story and what sort of, provided the impetus for you to get your act together and start applying. For me, that was much the same way. I was just all of a sudden surrounded by a couple peers who were going off to business school. And so it really just made me think, oh, like, is that something that I should consider as well? And I never deeply considered it before that. So in a lot of ways, like, I was very fortunate to be in just an environment where there were other folks who were interested in that as a next move. I would say that was what made me kind of consider it in the first place. And then from there, in terms of me evaluating whether or not I wanted to take the next step of actually applying, which is obviously a massive undertaking, I think for me, it was a calculus of if I left consulting, what would I do next? I had actually zero idea, like truly zero idea. And where my mind always went was, okay, I'm working mostly in the medical device space. In the 3, 4, 5 years I spent there, I gradually started to specialize in the medical device space and just kind of consistently work with those partners who manage those projects. So I gained a real domain expertise in the medical device space. So I was thinking, okay, I have, this domain expertise. Could I potentially apply that in industry, in a strategy role at a medical device company? And that was where my mind went. But I was like, I can't tell if that's where my mind is going because it's all I've ever really had exposure to, or if it's because this is actually something I'm interested in actively. And just taking a step back, when you think about the healthcare space, it makes up 20% of our GDP. Medical device strategy is not the only job in that space. So for me, business school was just a real opportunity to kind of level set on what is it that I would want to do before I'm kind of doing a bunch of trial and error in a bunch of roles that may not necessarily be a fit for me. How can I take a step back, evaluate, and be a lot more intentional about the path I go from there?
That makes a tremendous amount of sense. I'm curious, as you were working with all these clients in med device and other healthcare clients, did you feel that in order to move up, should you choose to stay in those fields, you needed an MBA? Like, were the leaders that you talking to, did they have MBAs? How did that factor in?
Yeah, that's a good question. I honestly never paid attention to the credentials of the folks that I was working with. And I think part of it was, it's sort of telling, right? It wasn't because it's sort of because I didn't look at our clients and think, oh, I desperately want your job. It was a little bit more like, oh, I guess that's a job that exists. So maybe that makes sense for me. So I didn't necessarily think about kind of the path to getting there in such an intentional way. And certainly if I had stayed at Health Advances, which was totally a realistic possibility, like you mentioned, Alex, I loved my time there. People don't often spend, I think, 5 years in consulting. So it was a little bit of a rarity and very much kind of a people-driven decision, I would say, to stay in it as long as I did. And if I did stay at Health Advances, I certainly wouldn't have needed an MBA to succeed there. So I think, yeah, for me, it was really just about taking a step back and kind of resetting on where I wanted to go next with my career.
And so when, you're starting to figure out that what's next stage, how did you end up deciding on your target list of schools?
Yeah, so my target list of schools, I ultimately, I knew I wanted to stay in the healthcare space. If there was one certainty going into my application process, it was that. And so I sort of over-indexed on the programs where I knew there was more of a focus from both curriculum and extracurricular perspective on healthcare related activities. And so what that ultimately meant was Wharton has an incredible healthcare management program. So I applied there. Sloan, just because they're based in Boston and, they're in Cambridge, surrounded by biotech, that felt like a natural fit as well. And then the third place I applied was Kellogg. So they have a healthcare track as well. And they have, a healthcare conference and they put a lot of resources towards the healthcare space. And so that was also the third place that I applied.
And had you talked to anyone from any of these schools prior to get a feel for like student life?
Yeah, I had talked to, I think, students from all three places before I applied. I remember talking to Courtney, and she connected me with a couple friends who are in the healthcare space.
Courtney is Alex's sister who went to MIT.
Right. Thanks for that context, Julia.
She says she's not coming on the pod until we make it really big. No.
Doesn't use it as her platform to gain followers. Smart.
I can edit
that, Courtney.
I can screenshot and edit the followers. I'm happy to do that.
Nothing wrong with a little doctoring.
Yeah.
So I talked to Alex's sister and a couple of our classmates at Sloan, and then I talked to, there were quite a few people from Health Advances, my consulting firm, who went to the healthcare management program at Wharton. So I got connected to a few of them. And then at Kellogg, there is also a couple folks that I had just known from Health Advances alumni. So all of those were definitely helpful perspectives. I would still say, like, ultimately it was a pretty personal decision in the sense that I had a clear vision in terms of what I wanted out of business school. And so for me, it was very much about, just having the right fit. So while those were like helpful perspectives, I feel like my kind of in-person time on campus and just talking to current students who were there, that was what really helped me feel like comfortable and confident in my decisions.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
And yeah, I feel like you approached it in a very thoughtful way, and curious about your ultimate decision to go with an MBA consultant versus trying to do the application by yourself.
Yeah, the MBA consultant. So I worked with, I guess that was so the consultant that I worked with was helpful in terms of just honing in on the three schools as well, and just kind of confirming that those were sort of within reach. They made sense for the story I was telling, for my ultimate goals out of business school. And so just having some of that external validation, I think, also helped me gain confidence in that. But yeah, ultimately, I think with a lot of things in life, it was a trade-off between like time and money. And for me, just outsourcing the research that I otherwise would have had to do without the consultant was just the right call for what I was trying to balance, especially work-wise. So obviously, like, people applying to business school are coming from, generally speaking, pretty intense jobs. And so the consultant was super helpful in terms of providing me with, one, insight into what to expect from the application process, how to craft my narrative. While I had kind of a strong story for myself, he really helps to make sure that it would resonate also with the admissions officers reading the applications within a pool of thousands. And then he also helped me through the interview process, just helping me to prep, giving really kind of an external perspective. And while I had many peers who were also going through the same process, and I'm sure would have been happy to spend the time with me to prep, it was kind of just the confidence of having somebody who I was literally paying to do that same thing and be, my sounding board, and just help me go through reps so I could get really comfortable with that going into the different stages of the application process. To me, I don't know that I would recommend it for everyone. Again, I think it's just a trade-off of time and money.
Right. Well, I want to go back to one of the things you said you got value out from it, which was helping craft your narrative. And so I know it's been a couple of years, but if you can go back into the recesses of your memory, what were the kinds of questions or exercises that the consultant did to help craft the narrative? Like, what do you think they provided that you would have struggled to do on your own?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for me, it was pulling together threads of different parts of my past. So I think without the consultant, I probably would have been hyper focused on just my career experience, especially as I had gotten to the more senior levels within consulting, because to me, that was the most impressive, obviously the most top of mind, and, just demonstrated my, kind of my ability to interact with C-suite executives and manage multiple projects at once, lead a team. So to me, those are all MBA-like qualities. I think the reframing that the consultant was super helpful in just kind of bringing to light is the fact that admissions officers are not only interested in, your exact capabilities in your most recent job. What they want to hear is a holistic person who is passionate about what they do, would add something to the community. So that's where kind of some of the parts of my essay is, drew upon experiences in undergrad that I never would have even thought to draw upon. But I was involved with, for example, the Society of Women Engineers, organization at Cornell. And to me, that was not, a wildly impactful experience, but I had helped to launch kind of this series where we brought in guest speakers to talk about their real life work experience with a group, like small groups of women in the society. And he was like, that is exactly the kind of thing that MBA admissions officers also care about, because you are helping to foster a culture and a community of people who are interested in the same things. So I think the consultant was also helpful for, reorienting how I thought about the various experiences.
No, and that's very helpful. And so you drew on undergrad experiences. Did you draw on, or did he push you to draw on personal experiences outside of both school and career?
He did to some extent. I would say it didn't end up being a core part of any one of my essays. I think it was additional color. Like one part where I remember adding that type of color was a component of the MIT, of the Sloan application was, I think it was like a 90-second or 2-minute video that I found incredibly awkward. And I just remember talking about, part of where my name came from. So I talked about my heritage and how, Jungduk, pretty unusual name. So I talked just about where that name came from, how, I have this massive collection of ducks at home, because over the years, especially growing up, even though it's not spelled the same way, it certainly sounds like a duck. And so I just have this massive collection of like rubber ducks and stuffed animal ducks and things like that. And so I think just showing more like personal and personality in those types of channels is where that more came out, but not so much my essays.
How many ducks made it to Kellogg with you?
Actually, I think one, because I have a little duck that has a Cornell t-shirt on it.
That's adorable. I love that. And I think, like, just to summarize for the audience, I think what Jungduk is saying is, and feel free to correct me if I'm misstating it, but basically the consultant was like a set of ears and eyes on your life and experiences. And like from a business school perspective, like what would stand out to them versus you as a person, like, you have one view of what's important from your life, but having another set of eyes who say like, hey, actually these things tie together and you might not see it. It sounds like that's a lot of what the value was.
Yeah, exactly. It was 100% that value. And there's just simply the collateral piece of it too. So just in, as prep for this conversation with you both today, I was looking through some emails with my consultant, and he just provided a lot of the prompting questions that I needed to help prepare for every step of the process, including things like the recommendation letters from the two people. So I had my direct mentor at work, and then the partner that I worked with most frequently serve as my two recommendations. And he provided the template for what he called a reference guide. And that was a reference guide. It was, me populating really specific examples, qualities that I wanted them to highlight in the recommendation letter. What is my narrative? What is my goal out of business school? That kind of template to really equip them with what they needed in order to provide the strongest possible recommendation letter. I would not have thought to do that. I would have been like, thank you so much, Sue. Thank you so much, Wyatt. Really appreciate the help. Let me know if you have any questions. And so
I'll send.
Yeah, just having that consultant be like, no, it is your job to equip them with what they need to be successful was also super helpful.
I will say also, I benefited secondhand from your consultant experience, because I remember the best advice you give me, which I think is also what I think is one of the best pieces of advice for the application, is to make sure that each part of the application is additive and not repetitive. And, the essay or parts of my essay, the first draft was a repeat of what was already captured on my resume, for example. And so appreciate you giving me some of the free secondhand advice. And Jungduk was one of the people who read and helped edit my essay. So also huge shout out to you for that.
Anytime. You're welcome for getting you into HBS.
Yeah. It's all you.
It's all you. I wouldn't have met her otherwise. So I'm also deeply appreciative. I'm going to send you flowers. Hearing about the essay is amazing. I want to go back to what you were initially talking about, was like that day, in March, St. Patrick's Day, when you got your 720 on the GMAT. Congratulations. Was that the first time you took it? What was your GMAT journey specifically?
Yeah, my GMAT journey, that was, the 720 was the first time that I took it. I had taken it because basically my thought process was, if I ever want to go to business school, I need to take the GMAT. It is the very first step in this whole process. So I might as well get that out of the way. So this is even before I had really honed in on any target schools. I, had no inkling of essays or application process. All I knew is that the GMAT was a core component of the full package. And so that was what kicked my butt into gear as far as buckling down and starting to study. So that 720 was the first time I took it. And then I got advice as I was evaluating different consultants. One of them told me, 720 is a great score. It could be better. Even if it's 10 points higher, it could, make a difference. So I want you to take that GMAT again. So based off of that advice, I prepared again, not nearly as much as I should have, ended up getting the exact same score. Oh. And it was also just timed really poorly. I was on, a pretty brutal diligence at work, and it was just, it was not in the right headspace, had not been studying as much as I should have. So in retrospect, do not recommend, unless you have the time and the headspace to really fully prepare for a second. It's just not worth it, because then it also takes away from the other parts of your life that you're trying to balance that with.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, and you went in, I think 720 was the cutoff for you, right? Like in terms of if you're going to keep your score or not.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That was my cutoff. And that was helpful to predefine too, just so that I didn't have a debate of like, oh, is this really good enough or not? It's just, this is the target I set for myself. It's binary, yes or no.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. And I think I was reading earlier when I was researching and thinking about the GMAT, like what scores, what are the cutoff scores? And I think anything like 700 to 730 is the kind of a battleground where it's like, it's not going to get you in, but it's not going to keep you out. And like, you're just going to have to have the other parts of your application stand out. And I think you probably benefited with the 720 because you come from an engineering and highly quantitative background, from what I'm gathering, right? So your GPA and your transcript probably shows some pretty good math grades. So maybe the GMAT. well, it's clearly good enough.
It's good enough.
Yes, the degree, right? Like you're coming in with like a check mark on the quantitative aptitude piece already, that maybe if you get a 710, 720 and you're coming as an English major, you're probably still good, but like I would say that there's like more of a reason to take it again than for you.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right too. And to Alex's point about how, an application is a package of components, I think because I felt a little bit more confident that even though my grades may not have been stellar, at least I had the degree in engineering. And so that kind of helped to balance out. That's really, I can at least check the box and say I have some analytical quantitative abilities.
Although I will say, Jungduk, having usually been at like the dorm or the apartment when you came home with a grade from a recent test, the curve at Cornell engineering was ridiculous. I remember being like, wait, is she gonna flunk out? Because the initial scores could be so bad, but then ultimately, don't worry, listeners, Jungduk ended with well above a 3.0, but
scraped by is what I would say.
That's so real. I took my first math class at UChicago, and the curve was not probably nearly as bad, but I remember I got a 40% without any context around it. And I called my mom just in tears, like, I'm not smart enough to be here. I have to come home. And like, sure enough, the average was still higher. The average was 50%. But it's all
the
context.
Average was failing.
Yeah.
The average was failing. Exactly.
That's what I mean by humbling, nothing to take you down a couple notches like an engineering class at Cornell.
I believe it. I believe it. So, before we move on, because I want to hear now about like your experience when you got to Kellogg and what that was like, or choosing Kellogg from your options. Were there any other parts about your application prep experience that you think the audience should know about, or advice that you got that you think would be really helpful?
I think that the application process, I only focus on 3 schools. I know, a lot of other folks choose to apply to more schools. For me, that was the number of applications I thought I could do really well. And I wanted to apply first round. So between time and quality, I made sure that I was only kind of focused on a really small subset of schools that I was genuinely excited about. And if I got in, I would be happy to go to. So I would say this is in contrast, I guess, to an undergrad application process where it's a little bit more like, wow, like let's see what happens when I, scatter my application across a wider net. I think for an MBA, because you're also balancing it against your job, which is probably pretty time consuming and intense, I think less is more. At least that was what what worked for me.
This is not a spray and pray approach. This is a be thoughtful, targeted, pick 3 schools. That's helpful.
Yeah.
So then you press submit on the 3 schools, and what happened after that, and how was your interview process when you got to that stage?
Yeah. So let's tick through the schools. Sloan, straight up rejected. They were a hard no thank you. For Wharton, I got the initial interview. And so I went and met with, actually, even prior to the interview process, which I should have mentioned, for Wharton, the head of the healthcare management program is a woman named June Kinney, who is, she's a storied figure among, at Wharton and, within the healthcare space. And so I actually met with her prior to the formal interview process on the advice of my consultant. And then so that way, when I got invited for the interview, I met with her for a second time. We already had some relationship, some rapport to build off of, which is super helpful. And then we had kind of the group interview, which is to give you a prompt, and then you work with your fellow applicants to work towards a solution and present it. So that went pretty well. I was actually, came out of the conversation with June thinking that went super well, felt really confident about it. Even the group interview, the dynamics can always be a little / very dependent upon who you're kind of paired with. But I thought that overall went pretty well as well. Ended up not getting into Wharton either. And then for Kellogg, I got the interview, went to visit on campus, met with one of the admissions officers there. And again, I was, kind of just scrolling through my notes in my email this morning, and actually sent my consultant, Tyler, an email and said, like, went incredibly well, super easy, flowing conversation. Loved Rachel, like the admissions officer. I just got a good vibe from being there. I was like, I felt really confident speaking to her, and I felt like a really natural dialogue and not like a traditional interview. So even in the moment, I just walked away thinking, if I don't get in, that's okay. I had a super positive, application and interview process experience. So, yeah. And then sure enough, a month maybe ish later, I was accepted into Kellogg.
Woo!
And yeah, that was the end of my story. So then from there, at least I made the choice really easy. It was, do I want to go to business school or not? And if so, it's Kellogg.
And I forget, did the Kellogg decision come out before the Wharton one, or was there like a 24-hour amount of panic?
It was reverse, luckily.
Okay.
So it was Kellogg first, and then the next day was Wharton, and I was like, well.
Oh man, that helps a lot.
Oh yeah, big time.
If you had not gotten into one of those 3 schools, thank God, you fully qualified, glad that they had the common sense to accept you. But would you apply to other schools in round 2?
Oh man, I think I might have. It would have been probably a pretty difficult decision though, just because it's so not only time consuming, but like emotionally taxing to go through that process. So I don't know if I would have been prepared to, kind of go through it again, but I think I probably would have, just because you kind of gotten like this close. All the application material there. It's just a matter of kind of tweaking them and making them fit for the next school. So I probably would have done it, even though it would have been just incredibly painful.
No, it all worked out the way it was supposed to, for sure.
Tell us about your experience once you got in. Like, what were some of your favorite moments from your experience at Kellogg?
Oh man, so many of them. I loved Kellogg. I truly think business school was transformational for me in so many ways, like personally and professionally. So 10 out of 10, can't recommend it enough. Obviously, business school was like a little bit of a weird time for our class because it was, Kellogg is on the quarter system. We had two very normal, wonderful quarters before COVID happened. And so it was a bit of a, non-traditional experience because of that. I would say for me personally, I think I benefited in the sense that what it allowed me to do is to form really deep relationships with a smaller set of people than I otherwise would have in a normal business school experience. Some of just the highlights for me were, I'll pull kind of one personal and then one professional. Personally, in the summer between first and second year, a lot of internships were, either totally canceled or shortened, or they were all a mess and everything was remote. And my internship was only 6 weeks. And so I had 6 weeks, probably longer, of the summer left to I debated doing another internship, debated, finding some other job or, something to fill my time. Instead, I just hung out, went to Colorado to be with my sister. We went hiking for 4 weeks, and then I came back to business school. And then 4 other friends of mine at Kellogg, who also had a bit of a break before school, we just kind of took a spontaneous trip down to the Smoky Mountains and spent, I think, 5 or 6 days hopping between a couple Airbnbs. We went hiking every day, got back, to the house every day in the afternoon, went for a swim, had cocktail hour, made dinner all together, and then, drinks on the deck. And it was just sublime. There is like no point in life, where you are just so free from obligations. There's no jobs to get back to. You're just starting school again. You're just kind of hanging out with your, best business school pals. So that for me is just, and it was so spontaneous. Like we couldn't go anywhere. So you're not doing, crazy international travel or yacht week or anything that you would typically associate with business school. We just literally drove from Chicago to the Smoky Mountains and like all piled into a car and went down there. And it was awesome. So the highlight, just on the personal side. And then professionally, I would say, and we can get into kind of more detail about this, but for me, the most valuable part of business school from a career perspective was the internship experience. I did 3 internships while I was in business school, 2 in semester, 1 over the summer. And they were from 3, they were all in the healthcare space, but just 3 different facets. So I did one with a VC fund. I did another with a health system. So I was working in their innovation group. And then I did another one with a mental health startup. And all 3 kind of different roles, different types of companies, different capacities. So just super, super valuable for me.
And so how did you end up landing where you are? Or maybe tease out what you or how you actually ended up in your current job, what you're doing there. And then, if you don't mind going into what exact roles were you having in those 3 internships prior?
Yeah. So I'll actually start with the internships because it kind of then leads me to my current role. But just at a super high level, I'm currently a product manager at a health tech startup called Transparent. My 3 internships, the very first one that I had was the summer internship with a health system. So that one, I wanted to make sure that at some point during this school, I had an opportunity to actually work with a provider. So I'd always worked, even while I was in consulting, with medical device manufacturers, pharma companies, biotech, but never the providers. And so that was just a perspective I was really keen on getting. And so I worked with University of Pittsburgh Medical Center in their enterprises group, which is essentially functions as sort of a hybrid between a VC fund and an incubator, where they, look to work with startups or straight up acquire them and they'll co-build products. So they have their own team of product managers, software developers, and they'll work to use technology to build a solution that they then pilot within the UPMC system. And so I was working in their digital solutions group as technically the title was product manager, but it was very much 80% strategy, 20% product management. And it's funny kind of looking back on that experience because you think about what I was doing in the product management capacity there, which was, tiny feature tweaks, like there's a copy change that needs to be made on that button. And I hated product management coming out of that role. I was like, product management, I don't understand the hype. I feel like there's this culture around product that makes it seem super elite, super cool. And I was like, I don't get it. That was awful. So no, thank you. And so then going into the fall, over the summer, I'd actually applied to, this internship with UPMC, had also applied to an internship with 7Wire Ventures, which is a digital health VC fund. I ended up taking UPMC over 7Wire because I wanted to work with a provider. But then in the fall, 7Wire came back and asked if I wanted to do an in-semester internship. And I was like, amazing. Absolutely. I want that experience. And so I ended up doing, Kellogg, the way the curriculum is structured, or the school week, I guess, is such that you have no class on Wednesdays, which is amazing. And then it's pretty easy to maneuver the rest of the days so that you have, all the classes concentrated on just a few days a week. So I ended up spending usually 2 days per week with 7Wire, maybe a little bit more, like 2.5 days. And then the rest of it would be spent on school time. But I did that for a quarter, which is also, incredibly useful. I had also been super curious about the early investment space and just what that was like on a day-to-day basis. It ended up being a lot more similar to consulting in some ways than I expected, because it's a lot of, market research. What are the macro trends that you're observing? A lot of diligence, into specific, potential targets. And a lot of that is very similar to what you might see in the consulting space as well. I came out of that experience thinking VC doesn't make a ton of sense for me right now at this stage of my career because I have zero operational experience. Mm-hmm. And I thought that, sitting at the VC fund, if I'm a founder looking for a potential investor, I want people who have, on the ground experience mm-hmm. and can actually help me stand up this company. And so I thought that my value add at a VC fund would pretty quickly hit its limit without actually getting kind of on the boots, on the ground experience. So that was my experience in VC. And then I went to, and then because of that internship, then I got connected to someone who worked at a mental health company called MindStrong. And so I worked on their partnerships team for a quarter, which was really, when you think about like execution of strategy, it was in the weeds. How do we stand up and implement a new partnership with a payer? So it was very tactical, just kind of running through the mundane details that we need to make sure we have credentialing in these states. We need to make sure we have the data file with these specifications on this state. So very, very tactical. And again, that was kind of my first exposure to that kind of operational work. So again, insightful, probably not the right fit for me career-wise, but at each step of the way, I think just a lot of learnings. So coming out of all that, my experience at 7Wire was super helpful, not just for, kind of lifting the hood on what VC entails, but also because it connected me with just an incredible network of people in the digital health space. So Transcarent is actually, founded by the managing director of 7Wire Ventures, Glenn Tolman. And so that was how I got, interested and excited about Transcarent, is just realizing Glenn is spending all this time on this startup that's still in stealth mode. I have no idea what it is, but if Glenn's working on it, it's got to be interesting. So I kind of kept tabs on it as I was considering full-time opportunities.
And so it ultimately is a product management role. So how were you confident that it was going to be different than your prior product management experience?
Okay, great question. So when I first applied to Transcarent, and also I would say this is active anti-advice. I only applied to one job at the end of business school, and this is it. The job I applied to was at Transparent. I just felt really excited about the company. I knew I wanted to work at a company that I was super aligned with the mission. And so I applied to the strategy manager role at Transparent. So I did not apply to the product management role. I didn't end up getting the strategy manager role because it went to one of your guys' classmates at HBS, who is a delight and a good friend of mine now. But she actually ended up getting the role. But as a result of the interview process, I talked to, 4 or 5 individuals at the company. They, were like, we actually, just gave that role away, but would you be interested in an internship on our product team? So it started off as an internship because that was, all they had headcount for. And for me, that was actually really helpful because I was also at the time super unsure as to whether product was the right fit for me. And it was like an internship, again, just because of the 3 experiences I had during business school, very bullish on internships. I was like, this makes a ton of sense for me. It's a really risk-free way to trial something out. And I would, absolutely, like I would be down to do something for 3 months. That's no time at all. So I interviewed with the product team, ended up getting an internship, loved it. It was completely different from my time, at UPMC. And so I interned for a couple months and then converted to full-time in September of 2021.
Amazing. I there's so much that you just shared that I think is like worth noting for the audience specifically. So one, you went from your overall career trajectory. Lots of people go to business school to do product. And you went from consulting and you managed to get an internship in product and then come out of it doing product management. So that's like one career path that we see a lot at business school it is a way to get into product management. I think the other thing is like through your internships, you didn't have to fully commit to full-time jobs to get the experience to learn about what you like, but you also got to put product on your resume. You got to put like VC on your resume. You got to put all of these signals that say like coming out of here, yeah, I can, you just opened the aperture of like all the things that you could go do after school with these 3 different internships. And then the last thing that I heard is those 3 internships, not only did they give you that experience, but the connections, right? So you're meeting these people and particularly in VC, but also healthcare it's a big world, but it can be a small world, right? In another way. So you're working with providers at UPMC and VC. And if you ever want to go launch your own startup later, you're developing all these connections and pieces and places that you can plug in and relationships that you can nurture moving forward. So I think there's a ton of value in what you just shared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you just summarized that so articulately. That second piece that you just hit on in terms of things I was able to put on my resume is so key. I think just the fact that I had the words product management, however small percentage of my time it actually was in practice, I think even that was enough for the strategy team who interviewed me at Transparent to think, oh, maybe product might be a fit for her. And so they made the connection of, it's actually not even on our job board right now, but it's an open role. So do you want to just go talk to our head of product? And I think the other thing that I would say is this is also a learning for me. And this is like a theme that you'll hear back when I alluded to the fact that after undergrad, I was like, absolutely never business school, graduate school. That's a never for me. That is how I felt about product management after my internship at UPMC. I was like, absolutely not, never. Product management is not the right fit for me. But I would just say like never say never, because like all those things change. Like once you learn more about what it actually entails, and you just you change as a person and your interests change, your goals change. And so I would just say like at every step, like keep an open mind as to what your next move might be, because it might surprise you.
What's the phrase? I think it's like strong opinions loosely held. Sort of is the way to go forward, right? Like have the strong opinions, but be willing to change your mind about them. And I think you've exemplified that really nicely in both of those examples.
Yeah. And I also on the internship piece, like Julia and I both had multiple internships as well, not just during the summer. The hypothesis I was testing was a little bit different than yours. Like for me personally, it was like, what size of company do I want to be at? Because I knew I wanted to go early stage. And so I tried one that was like around 30 people. And then I tried one where I would have been the first non-founder joiner. Ultimately, and another one where I could have been a co-founder, but yeah, that particular one was very a hot mess, I would say. Did not want to join, did not want to be a co-founder on that one. But yeah, no, it's just a really good point to like have these hypotheses that that you're coming in with and use the 2 years to test it. And, like you are in a position where you can go to these companies. I'm curious if all of yours were paid or not. 2 of mine were unpaid. One was paid. And it's the 2 years, I mean, you're down the hole a lot of money anyways. Yeah. Might as well be like, hey, like I'm a business school student and, you don't even have to pay me anything. I'm trying to add value and then also gain value to help figure out what the next move is.
Yep, exactly. The most valuable of those experiences was probably the internship with Seven Wire because they are just incredibly well connected. And that was the only one that I didn't get paid for. And that was okay, because
it paid for itself. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was exactly how I, got the interview for the strategy role at Transparent to begin with too. So like without that wouldn't have led to the, product internship, wouldn't have led to the full-time role and where I am now. So
yeah, agreed. That being said, everybody, if you're listening, always ask at least. Like you take the unpaid internship if they have no budget, but ask if they will pay. Come up with your time is worth money. So worth asking at the very least.
100%. I asked, I tried.
Yeah, no, and I've been in the same boat. I fully understand that. What do you feel like now, and maybe we'll sort of wrap up and move towards the rapid fire questions, but what do you feel like a couple of years out of school, where have you seen the value of your MBA show up in your work or your life?
Oh man, I feel like it just touches on so many parts of my life now. It's hard to tease it all out. One thing, which is sort of a sidestep to your question, but I'll just mention for your listeners. I think if there is one thing I could do over about my MBA process, I wish I had gone to another company outside of consulting before business school. Because I think there's a lot of times in my current role when it's a startup, there's a lot of chaos. It's, sometimes I can't tell, is it the company? Is it because we're an early stage startup and this is just how it goes? Is it because I'm new to product management and this is a kind of a crazy role? Like there's a lot of variables, but I think having some of that experience prior to business school would have just helped me to contextualize so much what I was learning inside and outside the classroom so that when it came up again, then I have a better kind of pattern recognition. I can say, oh, like this is what I saw in the company I was just at before. Here's how I think about applying it differently in my future role. Whereas I didn't have that kind of contextual awareness beforehand. And so now I'm kind of like, we probably talked about a situation just like this in business school, but I can't really recall because it wasn't relevant. It didn't seem relevant to me at the time. So I think I experienced like some of those moments where I'm like, darn it, wish I had gone to Transparent, and then business school. But yeah, there's just like, there's so many moments when I think about, I think it's less honestly like the learnings from like within, in the class versus I was involved in the healthcare conference my second year. I helped to run our like startup and growth fair as part of the healthcare conference where we invited 20 different companies to come and basically use it as a tactic for recruitment. So that conference happens in the winter in like January, February timeframe, which is on the later side as far as recruitment, like traditional recruitment processes, but it's kind of ahead of the ball for kind of startups who don't necessarily know headcount resourcing with a lot of notice. And so our conference was pretty well timed as far as just getting companies in front of students and vice versa, and using it as kind of a marketplace. And so that experience and just, I led a team of first years and reaching out to companies and just, it was a lot of project management. It was a lot of how do I empower these first year students to just, they're all adults, we're all adults in business school, like, what you're doing. So, you go find the companies that you think are most interesting to you and, bring them to the fair and things like that. So there's like some, management and like kind of soft skills experiences that I definitely gained in business school that were helpful. And then I would say from a personal perspective, the thing that I cherish the most out of business school, and I'm sure everyone says this too, is just simply the relationships that I've formed out of business school. And even beyond that, it extends beyond a direct relationships that I established during my time at Kellogg with my peers. I had brunch yesterday with, two of my classmates at Kellogg and another woman who had graduated from HBS the year below us. And there's already so much common ground when you meet another person who went to business school. And I feel like just immediately that shared experience and like all the commonalities across business schools and like just interests, where you are in your career, what motivates you, what inspires you, what interests you in terms of like what you like to talk about and think about. There's so much of that that I definitely didn't anticipate going into business school. But in retrospect, I'm like, wow, like I would love to hang out with her again. She was just super easy to talk to. And like I learned, so much just from chatting with her yesterday at brunch. And it sounds sort of silly, but I don't know, like it's just little connections like that I really appreciate now.
Couldn't second that enough. Julie and I largely started this podcast to have an excuse to talk to each other.
And to talk to people like you.
Yeah,
exactly. As much as I love to talk to Alex, I do. But like it's to talk to people like you and people who, I think it's not everyone has the same worldview, but you've got certain lenses that you gain from business school and questions that you ask about the world and about industries that I think are common and make for interesting conversations. So we're grateful to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So yeah, unless there's anything else you wanted to touch on, either Julia or Jungduk, time for maybe some rapid fire questions. I'm so curious, what is a stereotype about your school that is true? And what is a stereotype about your school that is not true?
Okay, stereotype that is so true is Kellogg nice. Kellogg people are just friendly. It's crazy. Everyone is so nice. Like that is a first and foremost quality I think that they screen on, and the admissions folks do a phenomenal job in terms of just, identifying people who are down to earth, friendly, personable. Reputation that, or what was it? The
stereotype that isn't true.
I don't know. What are the other stereotypes about Kellogg?
I was going to say, I know it's like friendly and like, outgoing and
yeah. I've heard the stereotype that it's, because I was in Chicago for 6 years before, way back when. I've heard the stereotype that it can be like, if you want to go more into marketing or non-finance roles, that it's the school to go to. I don't know if that's true or not. That's something I heard way back when.
That's a good point. I actually kind of think if you want to go into, like finance roles, and it's not going to be as strong as like a Wharton or any, something like that. But I would say even that's kind of true. Like there's definitely the areas of specialization where Kellogg is stronger, and it tends to be the ones where they've historically had more of a presence. I think that's kind of true. I don't know. It's hard to think of a false stereotype.
What about that everyone who goes to Kellogg either is from the Midwest or stays in the Midwest?
Oh, so false. So false. That's a good one.
Someone who's staying in the Midwest.
But not from there.
Not from there. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of people who are from the Midwest, stay in the Midwest, but especially my year, I think of like at least a third of the class went to San Francisco. It was nuts. It was a particularly high percentage of folks my year that went to San Francisco, but there's definitely a lot of like influx, outflux, and just broad geographical spread. So
nice.
Do you remember any interview question that took you by surprise?
My very last question of my Kellogg interview, the only reason why this is top of mind is because I was just reviewing the notes I sent to my consultant. The very last question was, what will you struggle with the most if you come to Kellogg? Which I thought was a good question. And I ended up saying, which is still I totally stand by, is balance. Because there's, I'm sure you both experience this at HBS too. You could spend your time doing 12 million things in business school. It's almost too much freedom. And so I think because of that, you have to be super intentional about how you spend your time. So
what's the worst piece of advice you got in your business school application process?
The worst piece of advice I got.
Take the GMAT again.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know why I did that. And I just remember being so stressed out, like right after I took it, I just sat in my car and cried because I knew it didn't go well. I was so stressed at work, and I just needed to go back home and log back on to do the rest of this project that I was working on. And I was like, why did I do that? Like, that was just silly. So worst piece of
It's a good
advice.
answer. It's a good answer. Maybe Alex, you want to do one last rapid fire and then we'll wrap it up?
Oh, well, yeah. We like to ask because so far we've only interviewed millennials and they particularly like it, but what Hogwarts house would you be?
Hufflepuff. I don't know why. I just feel like I'm not that cool.
Kellogg nice.
And so I'm like, yeah, like I'm a little bit of a pushover. I'm just like kind of nice and just there. So it just resonates with my core.
Please. I think Hufflepuff because you're kind, you've got a mission for what you're doing in your workplace, you're honest. Those are all good qualities.
Yeah.
Yes. I said Hufflepuff too, for sure.
I said Slytherin, but that's anyway, before we bore all of our listeners with our Harry Potter trivia too much, and before we hop off, is there anything else that you want the listeners to know? This podcast is really for people who either are thinking about business school, are applying, it's just kind of on their radar, and they don't, we're trying to share information so maybe they can make the best informed decision earlier on.
Mm-hmm. I would say, I think for me, business school made a lot of sense because I had a pretty specific goal. And I know people always say that, but that helped guide my entire application process too, because I had kind of a clear reason for why I was going. And it's a massive investment to make, like money and time and everything else that goes along with it. So I think be really clear with just like honest with yourself about what it is that you're trying to get out of it. And for some people, it was, I want to go to business school to find a partner. And so like, if that's one of your reasons for going, like also be honest with yourself about that, because it might impact, the school that you apply to. And then the second thing is just kind of a reiteration of what we talked about earlier, but I am still kind of surprised that I'm in a product management role, that I'm in Chicago. Like those are things that are surprising to me because I didn't expect it going into school. So just be open, I guess, to surprising yourself. Like there's a lot of opportunity for like growth and learning in business school that I wasn't anticipating, but is now the reason why I love it and why I appreciate it so much. So.
And that is such a great way to end it. And yeah, just want to say thank you so much. This was awesome as our first Kellogg guest. Very exciting. I know the listeners will love it. Millions of listeners.
Yeah. The only sad thing I take away from this, honestly, is like I wish you had applied to HBS so you could have been in our class too. Because it was just awesome. So I second Alex in saying thank you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. This is super fun. Really appreciate it.